Nice to meet you guys. I'm Andrea Hayes, principal at SVA Consulting. Just a little bit about me. I'm actually from Dover, Delaware. I think I've yet to meet anyone from actually Delaware and here in Wisconsin. But I came here actually for French horn performance. I really liked the teacher at UW. So I'm a graduate of UW, and I decided kind of halfway through to start majoring in psychology. And then got into neuroscience. So that's really where my foundation is in affective neuroscience. And so you'll see some things from peer-reviewed literature. That's really like where I I like to turn, to for kind of evidence-based research when we start to think about things like even ERP selection. So you'll see some of that infused in the work here. And I've been at SVA Consulting for about 9 years. I went from neuroscience to life science consulting. Got into SVA, and I've been on the ERP side for about 8 years now. So that was just a little bit about me. As far as SVA, we're business people that use technology to solve business problems. Always striving to serve people better. So we've been in business over 30 years. We have a sister company that's a CPA firm. We do some collaboration with them, but mostly we're on the consulting side. We have 4 separate teams. So I lead our business applications team. So we implement Acumatica ERP. We implement 2 different e-commerce solutions, so BigCommerce and Shopify. We have a separate data visualization and analytics team. They also do AI. They build kind of bespoke AI solutions as well. We have a change management and adoption as well. So they really work closely with our team on what we call our enterprise implementations, thinking a lot about end user training, how to communicate the change. And then we have a life sciences team as well, which is kind of where I started. A little bit about our business applications team, kind of what we serve. I know a lot of you guys have talked about manufacturing. That is a big part of our business. We do a lot of discrete manufacturing, distribution as well, warehouse management, as I mentioned, e-commerce. We have quite a few family offices as well on Acumatica, so lots of multi-entities, lots of eliminations, complex financials. That's a big area, as well as non-for-profit. So we have an in-house development team as well, all actually based in Wisconsin. Ryan just mentioned, you see this ETL again. We partner with our data team to help convert large enterprise companies over to our ERP, and they help with a lot of that data transformation too. And we also support a lot of regulated industries, so think FDA compliant, HIPAA compliant, even government work too. All right. So I'm going to kind of talk about the transformation journey. So from everywhere realizing, hey, I might need a new ERP or a new system, into implementing it, and then improving upon it as well. So we'll kind of start with phase 1, so the realization. How do you know that you need something better, right? So this slide really goes through what are the symptoms, right? So what are the symptoms for the diagnosis? So you might find that reporting takes a while, right? Or it's unreliable. What's really going on is lots of disconnected systems, inconsistent data. People rely on a lot of spreadsheets. I know I hear this one a lot for key processes. That's not uncommon. And so if you're finding that Excel is running your business, it might be time to invest in a new ERP. Same data entered in multiple places. This is a problem, right? Because you start to have data silos and start to have different versions of the truth, right? I do an analysis and my colleague does the same analysis with different data and we have different answers and there's inherent conflict there. Vendor announced an end of life or limited support. So at SVA, we actually, we're a Microsoft partner. We might implement a GP and SL. We have moved away from the Microsoft platform and chosen Acumatica, and I'll go through some of the reasons why. But really, those systems, Microsoft announced that they're no longer supporting them. And that can be really tough, right? Especially if people really like their workflow, they're used to how they do it today. And so that can be a tough reason to move because it really means you have to change even though you don't want to. Growing cybersecurity vulnerabilities. This has been really, really big. The old ERP solutions tend to be on-premise, so they're not in the cloud. And there's a lot of, feeling that, well, if I have the server, right down the hall, it must be safer than if it's in AWS somewhere, or across the country. And actually that's not true. So there's a lot more cybersecurity breaches. I think north of 30% more for anything that's hosted, on site or self-hosted. You also don't have like the automated, backups, any geo redundancy. Someone might have to come in on Christmas, right, to fix something. So there's, a lot of cybersecurity risks there. And actually we've seen an uptick in that, especially with our, even in our client base that are on the older systems that they still support. Employees frustrated by system slowness or errors. So these are just some of the symptoms that we kind of see of, okay, how do I know I need a new system, right? One thing, I'm kind of jumping the gun a little bit, but the first question that we like to ask when we implement a new ERP is to kind of project yourself into the future, right? So if you asked yourself in 1 year, have we successfully implemented our new ERP, what would you point to illustrate success, right? So how do we know that we were successful? So kind of take yourself into the future. What might that look like? A lot of the answers we get are actually the pain points today, right? And there's a lot of information in those pain points. And so we like to turn those into must-haves. So we can't track inventory or orders in real time. That means that becomes a point of we must be able to track inventory or orders in real time, right? So we like to take the pain points because sometimes those are the things that are top of mind, and it's hard for people to kind of think through what could be better, what could be an aspiration. So we like to ask this question and then really unpack it and understand what their vision is, and really distill it down into what's measurable, right? What's quantifiable? How will I know, right? Maybe it takes me 20 days to close the books, and I want to close them in 5. That might be helpful too, to see just kind of what it could look like, since if you're entrenched in an older system today, what might a newer system look like? So we have financial and reporting. So what I like to call like directionally correct financials. So maybe it's the 20th of the month. I haven't closed the month yet, obviously, but I can still look in my system and see, oh, what's my inventory position, right? How am I tracking for the month? Semi-automated bank reconciliation. I shouldn't have to spend hours kind of doing my bank rec. I should be able to have the bank transactions come into my ERP, auto match them, and the system presents me with the exceptions that it couldn't match, and then I'm just dealing by exception instead of bringing all the data in by hand and then having to hand match it. So we can send out this list. I won't go through everything, but just kind of trying to get a system, an idea for what a healthy system looks like. All right. Wanted to go through a few quantifiable ERP modernization metrics here. So when we talk about ROI, I know that was a discussion a bit in the last conversation, improve productivity, right? So what could you expect, right? And I try to cite all the sources here. So 70% of organizations reported improved productivity after they implemented the ERP. We'll get into a little bit more about some of the things that you could do if you're thinking about a new system, whether it's an ERP or not, to help boost that number. 50 to 60% reduction in close time. That could be pretty big. 33 versus 5%. So this is that on-prem versus SaaS hosted. So on-prem really being a magnet for ransomware, which we've seen as well. All right, 2.5 ROI, that's the average ROI for an ERP project. Again, we'll start to kind of talk through ways to boost this, but these are just a few numbers, obviously pretty material in terms of running the business, in terms of what a new system can do. All right, so we talked about realization, right? So how do I know I need a new ERP? Let's talk about requirements and evaluation. So when I started on the business application side, I started with the system selection work, and then I got into implementation, and now I do sales. So I've kind of been on all sides of it in terms of helping to run an agnostic selection of, okay, let me gather the ERP requirements, let's look at 5 different systems, and then down to implementing and then selling it as well. So it's you start to see some trends throughout that process. So we'll kind of go through 5 different things that I think can really help with the requirements. The first one is strategic alignment. So future fit, not feature fit. So it's not uncommon, my colleague Julia is here, she knows this too, to get an RFP with about 500 lines 20 pages, and we'll submit like 40 pages back, have to, fill out the whole RFP. Features are important. Features are, critical. But what you start to see is no one reads those responses. Now that there's generative AI, I'm pretty sure lots of people are just throwing those into a tool and having it, read something back. There's not a selection that, I've been on the other side of where, you answer all these questions and take all this time and people ask the same question in a demo, right? People aren't really reading it. And also it's not really the data that's driving that decision. It's like, if you hop on the scale and you don't like what you see, is that really going to motivate you to lose the weight, right? Like, is it really metrics driven? So what we like to do is start with what's strategic, right? Choose for tomorrow's business, not yesterday's system. So think kind of with the end in mind. And what we like to do is really think through, all right, what's the vision, right? Where's your company going? What are the objectives and how do you get there? So you can think of the success factors as the means to the end, right? What are the things that you must do to achieve that vision? And then choose, a system that aligns with that long-term vision. And that can really help set the stage for what you want to implement first, what you want to implement second. Are you looking for a tier 1 ERP, a tier 2 ERP? So really aligning with where you're going as a business can be really helpful. It's always the same thing. You always want to reduce waste and increase efficiency. And always the nuances of how you want to do that in your business are different. So here's just an example, right? We want to optimize AP. Maybe everything is coming, through email, or sometimes I have to print out a bill and, the CEO likes to sign it before it's approved. Okay, so our goal is to reduce waste. We want to optimize AP, so what are the things that we need to do that? Well, Ryan, I think, mentioned OCR, so I want to be able to drag and drop a PDF, maybe have that automated, and create an AP bill for me. I want to do automated AP routing, right? And so these start to be the things that feed some of the ERP selection. The next thing is that obvious kind of people, process, technology. Think about the people and adoption, right? If you have a system that's hard to use, adoption is tough, can take longer, and you won't see an ROI as quickly. Focus on usability. Will the system empower our people, or will it overwhelm them? There can be lots of bells and whistles, but if Carla in IT or in finance is not going to use it, that's an inhibitor, right? So like practicality. Process and workflow. Select a system that enforces best practices without over customization, right? Does it work the way that we want it to work? So this kind of gets into a little bit of what I've noticed as well, and it's always nice when it's corroborated with data. So this is just from a study. They actually did a literature review. So they looked at how people make decisions in ERP and the effect that cognitive biases have in those. And certainly see this quite a bit, right? So one is temporal discounting, right? Prioritizing short-term gains over long-term success. It's really easy, to do something like pick a less expensive system that maybe fits some of your requirements, maybe not all of them. Have a smaller payment out, but maybe you don't get all the wins that you thought, right? Optimism bias. Also, it's very easy to assume everything will work out smoothly and go really well. This comes into play a lot when we start to think about the budget, right, for an implementation. You see people, well, I don't want to spend this, I think our team could do this. At the same time, when you do an implementation for ERP, people have their daytime job as well, in addition to this project, right? And so sometimes, being optimistic is not the best path forward. We also like to do, on all our projects, we like to do what's called a pre-mortem. So that basically means, the classic term is post-mortem after a project. We like to do a pre-mortem during the project and try to think through, okay, what could go wrong? What might that look like? And then plan for that, right? Or plan how to make sure that doesn't happen, right? So we like to look at all the risks that are happening, what could go wrong, and make sure we're just very transparent about that with our team and the customer as well, and think through that. Information asymmetry. So this one's interesting. So the vendor knows more than the buyer. I know with internet and with AI, that's changing a bit too, but it is always like this tough piece, right? In that there's pieces I know more about, there's pieces the customer knows more about, but that can also cause an over-reliance on vendor claims, which is essentially, people can make claims about something, but then it doesn't pan out, right? Stuck on early numbers or demos, that's a big one, right? So whoever goes first sometimes can kind of entrench folks in what they should see, or even the numbers that they see. So being aware of these is really helpful. It has some tangible results. So how teams can make better ERP decisions is really like if your awareness of the bias and you're the low versus high, and you're proactive about it. There's different outcomes that you could have, right? So this is kind of saying, look, if I'm not too aware of the bias of what we talked about, right, the temporal discounting, and I'm not very proactive, my time to value is pretty bad, 20 to 26 months. I start to basically have a short-term focus. I chase features or vendors, and I underestimate how complex it can be, right? So then you start to see kind of this shift, right? As I become more aware of what could go wrong, right? And I become more proactive. Where you want to be is right down here, right? So basically the time to value is less than a year after you've implemented, whereas it takes much longer, right? If you aren't aware of these things that can happen in terms of bias, you could be overconfident. You could think about your short-term goals instead of your long-term goals, and all of that's going to impact your time to value. All right, so just kind of in summary on that one, don't fixate on features. Focus on where you're going strategically rather than in the next year, what do we need? Because really that system is going to have to cover all of that functionality. Mind the decision traps, short-term thinking, overconfidence. Try to think through a lot of that while you're in the selection process, and like I said, design for where you're going. So this next one is pretty big. So I know we haven't talked a lot about features. We've really focused more on strategic alignment, people, adaptability, the process and the workflow. This next one is technology fit. So there's components of the software that have nothing to do with some of the features that can help you in your selection. So what really differentiates different systems? So one is the roadmap of the manufacturer. So who, is it Oracle, is it SAP, is it Acumatica or Microsoft? Who's making the software and what's the strength of their vision, right? So how much are they investing in the R&D? How much are they investing in the product? Where are they rating in terms of the credibility, right? So you see things like G2 ratings, those are rated by users of the software, not industry users. Those really do matter, right? Because they're rated by people who use it themselves. So that can be really helpful, right? How ambitious is their roadmap? Are they thinking about AI? Are they thinking about AI in the right way? So really understanding where the product roadmap is can be really, really helpful. The architecture. We also talked about, in the last discussion, APIs, so integration. So how open is the integration? Is it built on a non-proprietary code base, or is it built on a code base that everyone has access to? So how hard is it to get in there and customize if you need to? And so think about extensibility, right? How easy can I customize? How easy can I integrate? And what's that code base? Because all of those components can really change, how if you're in the system and you've done all this work and all this cost to implement it, and if something doesn't work the way you want it to, are you free to start to make some changes? Otherwise, you can be pretty stuck. Your level of control. So there's a lot here. So one of them is, do you own your own data? And if you do, how do you get your data out of the system if you need it? Do you have access to the backups? And is it in a format that you can actually read and understand? Or is it a partial backup? So really understanding the agreement in terms of data ownership is critical. Can you pick when you upgrade? So a lot of systems will kind of force you into a schedule for upgrading, and it doesn't matter when it aligns or doesn't align with your business and when maybe busy season is. Thinking about when you upgrade and staying up to date, right? If you're on an older system, One of the big problems can be that you can't upgrade because it's been so long and the investment to upgrade, you might as well just get a new system. So thinking about how easy it is to upgrade as well is really critical. The extensibility, we talked a little bit about that in terms of the architecture, but if I wanted to customize something, do I have to have a developer to do it, or can I do it through the UI? There's all this low-code, no-code framework that in a good system should be available to your users. Maybe they don't have to know SQL, but they should be able to go in there and make the changes they want. Deployment flexibility. This one really comes into play if you have a regulated industry. So let's say you need to be HIPAA compliant, you need to be FDA compliant. Sometimes you need to be privately hosted. Maybe you need to be in a different AWS environment, for example, that's compatible with HIPAA compliance. So being able to choose your deployment method can be really critical. The licensing terms. So this one can be, there's two sides of the coin. Software companies can really discount the software a lot, but then you're locked into a really long contract, right? So that can be good, that can be bad, right? So what are the licensing terms? What's the exit strategy if you wanted or needed to exit or something happened to the business? Are you on the hook for like a 5-year contract, for example? The next one is costing models. So there's different ways that you can cost an ERP. So one of them is consumption, so the number of transactions. There's also the number of users that use the system. So just think about how your business is growing, right? Do you have a small number of transactions but a lot of people? Do you have a lot of people but the other way around? So being able to be flexible with the costing models and knowing that you can grow into the solution, add on modules as you need them, that could be critical as well. All right, so features and functionality. This is the one that most people focus solely on. Intuitive, easy to use. Can you personalize it, right? So can I change my views? Can I have favorites, for example, that don't impact my peers? The breadth and depth of it, will it grow with me? In a little bit, we'll talk about what the scope of an ERP could be, right? So is it going to be all-encompassing in everything, or am I going to have a pillar system and then ancillary systems around it that feed into it? Safety and security. So this is a big one, especially right now. But if I needed to, if I'm going to be publicly traded, is it SOX compliance? Do I have an audit trail if I want to? Does it handle segregation of duties? And then what's the backup and recovery, right? If it's SaaS hosted. AWS went down, 2 weekends ago? Are you going to be impacted? And if there's true geo redundancy, you shouldn't be, right? So what is the uptime of that software? And then accessibility, right? So if do you need to be on a certain device to access it? Is it browser agnostic? Is it device agnostic? Can you access it when you need to? How hard is that to do? So just kind of thinking through the non-functional or the technical features, that kind of get lost in a lot of selections. And the last one really is the partnership, right? So a lot of it is what you implement, but it's also how you implement it and the level of trust that you have with the company that's doing the implementation that can make or break it. Are they there in the long haul, right? So there's the life cycle of the implementation, and then there's most of the time you partner with that vendor or with that agency, is after implementation. So what does their support model look like? What does their continuous improvement model look like? Do they have resources that will support you? And what does the pricing look like? So there's a lot to investigate there. Some ERP solutions go to market directly, right? So themselves, and then, do you want to be dealing with a large organization or a smaller one, right? So really thinking about what fits for your company is pretty critical there. So these ones are a little bit food for thought. I know this is really small. Sometimes we do, system analyses, right? And so what is an ERP, right? So this is starting to think about pillar versus non-pillar systems. So we kind of have different areas here. This is obviously for life science consulting. I've got, my commercial, cross-functional supply chain, back office systems, right? So this was really just kind of an inventory of all the different systems that this company has. And then at the center, we have master data management, right? So you'll have things like employees or stock items in more than one system. How many systems are they in? Who's the publisher? Who's the subscriber for those? Different integration methods, maybe a data lake, data visualization tools as well. It can be really helpful to zoom out and do an inventory of your solutions and systems and say, okay, what is the ERP going to encompass? Is it going to be an all-in-one ERP and CRM? Are we going to jam in, other marketing requirements in there too? When are we looking to integrate versus have that all-in-one solution? Typically, unless you're, a billion-dollar company and going on SAP or Oracle, what you see is the ERP obviously being the foundation for financials and basic operations, but then maybe using other systems for things like benefits or payroll, right? And so you start to see kind of paint a picture of all the different solutions. Maybe some of them need to connect, some of them don't. But now think about 2 slides ago where we want to make sure that the system is extensible, that it can integrate as well, right? Because otherwise, if it can't integrate, now it has that data silo, right? And so really doing an inventory of your systems, understanding, okay, the pillar systems are the big ones. Those are the ones we're really heavily investing in. We recognize we'll have some other ancillary systems, and then can they connect to each other, right? And then what does that master data management strategy look like across them? What's the system of record or the golden record, right, for things like a vendor or employee? This one is really tiny as well. Don't try to read it. But this one was, I think they were on Exapta here. So you can kind of see this was an as-is versus a to-be diagram I made, where we had not yet done the ERP implementation, but we wanted to understand, hey, what are all the connectors to it, whether they're manual or not, right? And so like the dotted line is the manual, the solid line is integrated, but you can really see like they made their ERP their data hub, right? And that can be kind of tough because then what you start to do is jam in a lot of information into the ERP that maybe shouldn't be there, right? As an example, we had a client that put employee ID numbers as the employee's social security number, right? Like maybe you don't want their social security number in the ERP. Maybe that should just live in the payroll or the benefit software. And so kind of understanding what's going to integrate, what's not going to integrate. And this really helped us say, okay, this is the current state. So what are we going to plug in? What do we not need to plug in? So your ERP is not your data hub. Your ERP is also not your analytics and reporting tool. So essentially, in the same way that it's not the source of aggregating all the data, it's a huge source of data for either an EDW or a data lake or analytics tool. That's where analytics can really help, right? And so you'll have kind of, like I mentioned, employees in multiple systems, maybe stock items in multiple systems, and having a holistic view of that's where the EDW kind of comes in. And so it should bring in all the data and then have logic built into it that starts to present that data in meaningful ways that people can see. Otherwise, you start to add on, to the ERP and jam data in there when it's not as appropriate. All right, so last one, I kind of put 3 and 4 together here. So implement and then optimize. Kind of start with why those two go together. So our manufacturer, Ecumenic, actually produced this. I thought it was really interesting. So the NPS is the Net Promoter Score. That's the likelihood that a user is on a scale from positive 100 to negative 100 to recommend for or against the product, right? So older systems today, it's like a negative 50, right? It's really, people don't want to use it. They're not recommending it to their friends. But it's the same product, and the Net Promoter Score here is different, right? This is all Ecumenic implementations. But what they found was that if you're live within 6 months, you are a lot happier with the same exact product than if you're live, I don't know how long this took them, but over 2 years, right? So you start to be a detractor the longer that you wait to go live. And what does that tell us? It really tells us, okay, let's land and expand, right? So small circles of success. So sometimes we go live with just finance or back office, and then we go live with operations, right? And so, it helps us kind of, and the client gain confidence in the system, gain confidence in the reports, and then expand to another team as well. There's pros and cons to all of that, right? There's inventory is tied also to your general ledger. So, there's some integrations that have to be taken into account. So as always, a pros and cons analysis, right? Is the interim solution going to work? Is it going to, land us in a better spot? Typically, we like to do our implementations in six months or less. For larger projects, it has been, I think we had one that did take a year. But this type of model can be really, really helpful because it can get you live much quicker, happier in the system, and see that data. What this can start to look like, right, is we can deploy in manageable phases with clear milestones, right? So we might just lay out this plan of, okay, phase 1, we're doing this, phase 2, we're doing this. Sometimes if it's separate teams, we might, parallel both of them, right? So start the operational implementation while the financial one is still going on. In large part, the hard thing is people's time, right? You also have a day job while we do the implementation. All right, so here's the last slide. I kind of like this one. Steve joined the gym in January. He's had disappointing results. Today, he's finally decided to head down there himself to find out what's going on. So this one is pretty relevant, right? Because, I talk to leaders who really want to invest in the new ERP solution, and they could be managers as well. And they, sometimes they don't want to get their hands dirty or in the system. And be that example, right? And then their team sees that and they don't either, right? And so that can be really tough if you have a manager that's expecting results, but also not investing in the solution. And so that's a really big one, right? ERP implementations don't cause the dysfunction, they expose it, right? And so we see a lot of this. It's really tough to make a decision. It's tough to get in there and try something new, right? The ERP is the intersection of all of that. And so what we've seen is it reveals misalignment and decision bottlenecks. A lot of what we do is less of the software implementation and more of managing how do you make a decision, right? You're changing a process, you're training people. So really helping people work through this. So sometimes it's not uncommon that we'll establish a steering committee and help to facilitate those types of decisions. Surface unclear ownership and process breakdowns. It really is all about the people. The functionality across a lot of Tier 2 ERP solutions is pretty much very similar. That technology slide I showed is where a lot of those differences are, but it really comes down to the people and the strength of the leadership. It really does force leaders to clarify priorities and their governance too. So I think that's probably it. Yeah, all right. I have my email up here with a QR code that takes you to the website. Any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Have you ever done integration of a new ERP system while a company was on an old ERP system? Is there a staged approach that you can use for that?
Yeah, so we like to do a hard cutoff.
Okay.
So, basically have you in your old system, and then we'll have a cutover weekend, and then we'll bring you onto the new system, on let's say Monday, for example. And the reason is that if you try to enter data in two systems at once, you're spending more time figuring out why they don't reconcile. But I will say, for the data that we bring over that weekend, we always test it first, right? So that you're confident in knowing what's coming over, how to validate it, and we're confident too, as well.
On your land and expand model, how do you deal with data that's missing when you start a new section?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, so so for we did a financial one first, right?
Right.
That's tough if you have purchase
else,
orders,
right.
and purchase receipts and then AP bills, right? And so we would typically not bring over those components until the next phase,
Okay.
right? And then bring over ending balances, for example, monthly until they're live. But that is where we do that. I mean, that's a good example of where we'll use a Matillion or a data fabric to transform the data. So sometimes like we'll take ownership in extracting and transforming the data with the client to, to cleanse it as well.
Okay.
So we can bring it over multiple times and load it multiple times with confidence. That can kind of buy more time too to help cleanse the data if it's really messy, which is not uncommon.
Or just not there.
Or not there, yeah.
So if you're trying to bring in planning, but everything else is kind of there, but not really.
Yeah.
It's a mess for a while.
Yeah, or we'll do a manufacturing implementation and they might not know their throughput. Right? So sometimes the planning piece can take longer just because the data, to your point, isn't there. Yeah, exactly.
So there's no easy way. I mean, it's gonna take time.
Yeah, I mean, there's no shortcut.
Right.
Yeah, one thing we do too is try to be really thoughtful of what data we bring over and what data we don't.
Right.
So historical, a lot of people want historical sales, but that's really where an EDW can be most helpful, right? Do you really need the data? Is the juice worth the squeeze?
Is it good?
And is it good? Yeah, the analogy is data's your grandmother's attic, right? Where it's it might be really valuable, but it might just be a box that if you just say, hey, take everything, select all, and bring it over, what's going to happen, right? It's not going to be that helpful. Yeah.
When you've come in on the back end of other people's implementations, or when things don't go as well for you, what are the reasons usually?
Yeah, we have kind of inherited clients, or they've come over to us that were implemented by someone else. I will say that I know that I keep saying that the functionality is less critical. It's early on when we do the implementation, we do the strategy, right? So we understand their objectives, their success factors, but we also do their dimensions. And the dimensions are really, how do you look at your business? And getting the dimensions wrong is common, and it's really tough because it's a decision that you make early on in the project that's hard to unwind, right? But when we say dimensions, that could be your financial dimensions, what's your legal entities? What's your natural account? What are your sub-account segments? How do you look at your data, right? Do you look at departments, for example, right? Every single transaction line in an ERP is coded to those dimensions. So having to change those midway through can be really tough. We've done it. It's not for the faint of heart, but really understanding, and we're not in Acumatica when we go through that, or the ERP. We're really in a process chart to say, how do you look at your financial data? How do you look at your P&L? Different than how do you do an expense analysis or just a pure revenue analysis? And let's not jam those components into your financial structure if we don't have to. It's those, a lot of other decisions in an ERP are easy to unwind. They're configurations. But the pivotal stuff, like the financial structure, that can be difficult. But we go through that the same as the go live, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. How do you deal with or prevent scope creep? Because on projects,
Yes.
I've ever bought, it's always come up, right? Oh, that's not in scope. Or,
Yeah.
So what's your methodology there?
Yeah. So the backlog is key, right? And actually I showed that slide of the objectives and the success factors, right? A lot of times the aspirations that come up weren't in scope at all, right? And so we'll color code those to say, hey, we heard you, right? But we're going to put those on a parking lot for now. And then it becomes the roadmap plan after they're live, right? And so early on, we'll go through a requirements phase where we identify all the use cases with acceptance criteria, and we'll flag each of those with the client of, is this in scope or is this out of scope, right? And so very early on, even before they're trained, they know, okay, I really want this one thing, but I'm not going to get it till later. Also, there's sometimes that decisions are made, midway through the project of hey, we are going to bring this in scope, right? One of them was barcoding. That was probably our most recent example of our inventory position, is really bad. We need barcoding on day one to be able to make sure it's accurate, right? Of course. So that's the change that we'll make in terms of so we'll write up a charter, we'll agree on the services, and we'll add that on kind of midway through. So we'll, either parking lot or, with leadership's guidance and approval, we'll go through a change order process.
Great, thanks.
Yeah. All right.
But how have you seen the systems change in the last few years and kind of roadmap what's going into these systems now that didn't exist previously?
Yeah. The obvious one is AI. And some ERPs are faster to roll that out than others. The thing about AI in your ERP is like there's a lot of sensitive data, right? So you don't want someone to get in and do a query of what's the CEO's salary, and so like the slower to bring those on, is kind of what we've seen in some ERP solutions, just because they're also trying to think through like the security model, which can be really tricky. I would say AI is probably number one. There's also, like along with that is I think the advent of AI. You have dashboards, pre-built dashboards that everyone's going to look at all the time, right? But with AI, everyone wants like a chat bot to say, hey, show me this, right? So not pre-built dashboards, but newer dashboards, right? And so that's where sometimes the approaches can be different. Sometimes if that's like real-time data that's in your ERP, you should have that in your ERP. Otherwise, I've also seen new, faster APIs to say, okay, we're going to put that out of the ERP and put that into like a Power BI or a reporting dashboard.